said, for instance, if your Oregon tax return shows that last year you made less than, pick a number, $40,000, you get a benefit. So you could have made the gate very easy to walk through. We're not talking about SNAP, we're not talking about HUD or Section 8 here. We're talking about something that you wrote. So why didn't you write a measure that would actually help people living in poverty and not help people who were middle class and above?
Sure.
When you set that gate, if you think of the top 1% being folks who, in your eyes, do not need this money, when you set that gate, you exclude a lot more than 1% of the folks who actually need the money. So to be able to,
but now, if
I'm not in the top 1%, and I don't need this.
Let's say you make it 40.
Pretty sure you are.
Let's say you make it $40,000 or $50,000. That doesn't make sense to me. Half the people in this state don't need this check.
Actually, Nigel, the federal statistics show that 500,000 people live at or below the poverty line. If you multiply that by 1,600, which is actually not a guaranteed number, the number can fluctuate over the years. So, but let's take the 1,600 figure. That's $800 million in distribution. It's a $6.8 billion a year tax. So I think you're asking a great question. In part, that question is what happens to the other $6 billion? Where is it going? Higher prices, people who don't need it, administrative bureaucracy to determine eligibility. The DOR says the Department of Revenue says they need 199 people to determine eligibility and prevent fraud.
Let me, Antonio, please, let me give you a chance to answer that question.
Right, so think of, compare this to, for example, universal public education. You could set up a program in your mind where you exclude the wealthy or the folks who merely make $250,000 from public school. Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? That would clearly be a bad thing, right? We do not, it is unhelpful to set a barrier to access the good things of society.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm not asking the question. If the purpose of this program, this new tax, is to benefit people who are living in poverty, wouldn't you exclude people who are not living in poverty and say, we'd like to maximize the benefit to people who are living in poverty? Because the purpose of this tax isn't to help Angela Williams, right? It's not to help Phil. So
there's a few things that I think are really important here. One, right now, for those who fit into that 44% of folks who can't cover their basic costs, a large percentage of those people are living above the poverty line. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that the poverty line is ridiculously low.
Not a line.
I mean, so let's expand that conversation a little bit to be truthful and honest about what's happening on the ground for Oregonians right now. So if we take that number of 44%, which is an independent study by United Ways, looking at how many people in this state can cover their basic costs, we're talking about rent, food, child care, those things.
Student loans.
That's 2 million, more than 2 million people. So if we think about those 2 million people, what we find right now that's happening in our economy is that most people are having to work more than a full-time job. And they're having to patch together through our gig economy income to be able to make things work. This means that from year to year, their income might change significantly. One year that they really need that money, it might look like they're doing fine from last year's tax reports, and they're not going to get it. The reality of where we're at right now is that we need to be thinking about something that meets people when they need it, where they're needing it, and not playing into all of these existing systems that ultimately don't help us understand what's happening on the ground. From our perspective, that's pretty important.
Okay, let me ask the question a different way. Why would you give this benefit to people who make more than $100,000?
So one of the things that I think is really important as well is to talk about administrative costs of means testing programs. And I'm not really sure the legitimacy of the conversation about 199 people.
Oh, it's in a memo from the Department of Revenue.
Needing to be able to push out money.
But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking why give it to people who make more than $100,000?
It makes it easier, faster, the money that it would take to do it administratively to make sure that the 10,000 people who are millionaires don't receive it would actually go to I'm trying to answer your question, so I'd just like to be able to like finish this idea. Right now, when you means test something, a good chunk of anywhere from 5 to 10% of the administrative cost goes to making sure, building the tools. Then another percentage goes to trying to soak up all the people that are left out because of that through one reason or another, which happens every time. All of those administrative costs, instead of going to means testing, finding all of that, you're actually not putting more, the money that it takes to be able to easily push money out to everybody is a smaller percentage than what goes to people who don't deserve it. So from a fiscal perspective, we're actually allowing more money to go out to people by having it not be means tested, and we're ensuring that everybody who needs it gets it.
And we know that like universal programs like Social Security are more popular in the community and more resistant to attack from like special interest groups.